but it's nice to understand the structure of triggers and how to use it as a tool for yourself. And then you have this video to go back to because it'll be recorded, to help you, remind you of the steps, to help you recognize where you are on the steps and how you can break that cycle. But the interesting thing is, which always happens now with my guides and the spirituality and my soul guiding me, the last 48 hours I have gone through a massive situation that could have been triggers everywhere, but there's 3 people involved. These 3 people are working on the triggers, and what they went through today, I went through 2 months ago, and I had to work on the triggers then. And this is how he gave me the idea for this course, believe it or not. So then they're going through it exactly the same, but I'm in there more like, it feels like I'm more like a support, because even though I'm part of the situation, I'm not feeling triggered. And for me, it's been a validation that whatever I worked a month ago, it really worked. And I can say to you, yeah, you can walk around without triggers, if you work on them. And the interesting thing is, I was talking to them today, I said, why did I pick the 19th? But in my head, why did I think it would be next week on a Thursday? Today's Friday. There's not the 2 days doesn't match, right? And to be honest, we closed the chapter on this situation with the triggers, literally. And now texted me asking for wondering about the link, literally. And I got all the signs from the universe, and I was doing some shopping for tea for dinner, and the price was 11.11, and I thought maybe the course should have been numerology today instead of triggers, but it all blends in the end. But I'm gonna go with the triggers because it's fresh. The topic, the bullet points I sent in the group is super accurate. We went through every single step in the last 40 hours. I was just reviewing that as I was cooking dinner and thinking, oh my God, we just went through this the last 48 hours. So it validates that what I wanted to put together and share is true from soul understanding. Okay? It's very true from soul understanding. So when you're listening to your soul guidance and you're learning the lessons from your soul, you're learning processes that helps you release trauma, release triggers, release density, release everything that we've gathered over the years. And now we're trying to get rid of it. Okay. So it's true, and it's been validated by the universe today. And I'm so excited and ready to be here. So even though it was a bit of a, oh, it's today, I'm here. I'm fully here. I am fully here. Okay. I want you to use pen and paper and think of any trigger. It doesn't have to be one that you can think of it right now, but it might come a bit later, a different trigger, and you can change it. It's absolutely fine. But just think of a trigger, something that's been triggering you. Somebody's triggering you, or you're feeling triggered because somebody keeps doing something. Anything that relates to trigger for you. Just write it down. 1. Something perhaps you already worked with, something perhaps you haven't worked with yet. It does not have to be anything, just triggers. Think of triggers and you think, right, I know. Everyone ready? Okay. So triggers is anything that brings any type of emotion up for you to feel. It could be a happy emotion, a love emotion, anger emotion. So it could be any emotion. A trigger is anything that elicits an emotion to come up. If you meet someone and you fall in love with them immediately, that's a trigger because it brought up an emotion for you to feel. But why is it that sometimes feeling love can be difficult compared to feeling anger, or the other way around? And triggers take this connotation of repetitive cycle issues or a negative connotation when we struggle to feel the emotion and the trigger becomes a projection. Okay. When we feel triggered, sometimes we have the emotion come up, sometimes we bottle it in. When we bottle it in, we are way beyond on the conditioning of a trauma for that trigger. If you can feel trigger and feel the emotion, that's actually a good thing. If you can feel trigger emotions with the trigger, that's quite healthy actually, as long as you're not projecting anything beyond that. You're just able to feel and be with it. Because when you fall in love with someone out of nowhere and you feel the love, you triggered, you feel the love, and that's it. You're feeling the love. But when it comes to anger, it comes heavy with other perceptions, programming, conditioning, limiting beliefs. It comes with all that. Love can also come with all that, and that's when it becomes distorted and toxic, right? But when it's pure love, when it's soul level love, unconditional love, you just feel it. You just feel it in your body. So going back to the trigger, where we want to talk about the trigger that has been distorted, that's been conditioned, that's been limited, that's been bottled up. I'm going to first talk about how the trigger is created in the first place. And I want you to start breaking down your own trigger that you have in your piece of paper now. You don't have to tell me because you're going to do your own work. I'm going to work through the structure, and that's going to bring memories for you. That's going to bring emotions. That's going to bring remembrance of each step, how that trigger became a trigger for you because of the steps I'm going to go through. If at any moment anyone feel uncomfortable and want to just stop, I'll do a heart chakra moment for a few minutes just to calm down the energies and the emotions, and we try to settle down. I don't want anyone getting upset and re-triggered. That's another thing we need to avoid. Okay, so I want you to be very honest and say, Robbie, can we stop? And then we'll just do a heart connection for a few minutes to really settle things down. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna talk about how a trigger becomes a trigger, because I want you to be able to pick up your trigger and say, right, I'm going to try to work out where that comes from. And every trigger that you do that, the process becomes easier and easier, especially when dealing with the subconscious. The subconscious starts to open more quickly to give you those answers that you need. So the first trigger might take a week or two, but the next few triggers could take just a matter of moments. And I'm literally saying a matter of seconds for you to go through the process. Yeah, there's about 6-7 steps which could take you a week, but as you get proficient in unfolding your trigger, it will take literally a couple of minutes. You're just going to do automatically, and you're going to go through the processes and realize, right, I know what to do next. Okay. And this is what the course is for you to be able to do it yourself, empower yourself for self-healing. That's what I like to teach, right? So let's get started. And then the second part will be, how do you resignify that trigger, so that the next time you are in that situation, you're not triggered again. And if I find that it becomes too long, we'll do part 2. Okay? So you have your trigger. Trigger is a stimulus. It's something that will elicit an emotion. So you wrote down your trigger. I want you to pick an emotion that comes with it and write it next to it. Okay. Usually these triggers will come from childhood. There's no other way around it, because it takes years for something to become a trigger. A trauma doesn't mean something horrible has to happen to be a trauma. The word trauma can be, again, distorted in science and therapeutic in therapeutic groups, can be very distorted, and even through the public. The public use the word trauma, and it's something major, something horrible happened, something really intense, something horrible. But trauma can be something just like a conditioning. For example, your mom or dad one day said, "Don't do that, because I'm gonna have to clean it all, and that's gonna take all my time again." That's a simple conditioning programming that leads to a trauma, because you'll be listening that as a child so many times when you do something, and the parents will feel triggered and react the same way, project the same way. But your own interpretation and your own feelings that arises, and how you cope and how you avoid, is yourself conditioning to protect yourself, which then gets bottled in. So eventually later on, you get triggered in similar situations, and usually will come through a mirror reflection, right? So you have a stimulus, you have an emotion, you have an interpretation. So think of that trigger that you have in your paper, and think of the first very moment in your life that you can remember, the first that come to the mind, when you felt that emotion linked to that trigger, and write it down. Okay? So you have an emotion that you picked up, whatever comes to mind. And every time I ask a question here, because I'm going to be using a little bit of EFT and NLP techniques, whatever comes to mind, I want you to be that first thing that you write down. Don't overthink it. Don't rethink it and say, well, is it really? Don't doubt yourself. This is the moment to trust your soul speaking to you. Trust your heart speaking to you, and trust your mind speaking to you. You are creating that balance right now. Okay? Whatever comes first is the answer. Do not overthink. Okay? So you have a trigger, and you have an emotion. When was the first time you had that emotion? Okay? So you just have the emotion. What was your perception or interpretation for that emotion? For example, a child does something, not aware that it's creating more work for the mother or father, The mother complains and shows the frustration of them having to do it again. That child feels, for example, upset. That child feels constricted. That child might feel guilty. That child might feel blamed, just being told off. Okay. And why did you feel that? Why did that child feel blamed? Because she made her mom or dad work harder for something that they made a mess of? So why? So work on that emotion and try to figure it out. Why? What was the interpretation from the other person, coming from the other person or for the other person on your emotion? How did you interpret that? Was it about you or was it about them? Is it how you felt about yourself or how you felt about them? Okay, so that's the next stage of how that trigger is being created. And I'm going to stop on this stage here because I want to clarify another aspect of it. If there was a trauma that was horrendous, sometimes you only need to happen once because it's very intense and very, what's the word? Abrupt to your soul. Okay. And the stages happen pretty much all at once. But when there's something so simple like the way someone speaks to you as a child, but they don't think anything of it, but really it's causing some emotions on the child, but they don't even know what that emotion is because they don't know how to label emotions yet. They're going to have to, this is going to have to happen several times over the development of the child. So a mother will have spoken that way from the age that they can understand that they're feeling something to the age where they can understand what that feeling is called. So it could be from the age of 3 all the way to 8, 9, 10, 11. So it will be happening over a course of many years for it to then become a trauma. Does that make sense? So it's the frequency, intensity, and how repetitive that is that causes us to go to the next step. Okay? So you have your stimulus, you have your emotion, you have your interpretation of that reason for that emotion. For example, is that emotion about you or is that emotion about the person? Is it because you feel bad that the person you did something that caused you to feel bad for that person, or did you really feel bad about yourself? Okay. Because sometimes we can direct everything to us and sometimes we can direct everything to somebody else. So you need to determine in that emotion, in that interpretation, which way did you direct that situation? Towards the person to save the person or towards you to save you? So just different ways of seeing it, okay? And that's your own child interpretation with the resources you had at that age. Nothing more. So you're going to go to the next stage, which is the coping mechanism. So this has been happening. Your mom and dad is talking to you that way every day. Every time you do something, you play, leave a little bit of a mess, you get told off. This happened, you get told off. You have to build then coping mechanism because it's going to come again. It's going to come again, right? You're starting to become a cycle. So what's the coping mechanism you found? So for that child, perhaps that child realized that if she doesn't make a mess, she doesn't get told off. If she does it perfect, she doesn't frustrate the mom or the dad. They don't feel burdened. If the child takes the burden for herself, it doesn't transfer to the mom or dad. Yeah? You see how it can either go both ways or either way. And what is that coping mechanism that little child found to protect herself from that not happening, which is, maybe she stopped playing with things that are messy. Maybe she stopped playing Lego and plays with just one doll. Okay? There's a change in behavior in that child. And we notice that with our children, saying, why did they stop doing that all of a sudden? Right? Because whatever they were doing, it was causing friction between that child and somebody else that was making that situation an issue. Okay? Let's take a nice deep breath. Nice deep breath. Let's go in our hearts. I just felt the intensity of the field rise, so I don't want anyone getting re-triggered, and I know there'll be a lot of thinking. That's okay. It needs to happen. We are here releasing as well. Whatever trigger you chose, we will be releasing today, okay? And yawning is a release. So let's go in the hearts. Breathe in your heart really nicely, really nice. Take all that in, nourish yourself with that until the intensity comes down. Let's do it together. Beautiful. Do you feel it coming down? Not yet. Just stay on the heart a little longer. Beautiful. Any easier? Good. Good. I'm going to slow down a little bit. So coping mechanism can be represented as a behavior or a behavior change. Okay. So even a change of behavior can be an early representation of that coping mechanism, which then comes to the next stage, which is the avoidance. Of course, if it's getting too much for that child to always get spoken in that way, and the way that child feels, the way they're interpreting at that time with the resources they have at that time, and I'm going to go back to the resource they have at that time, and then they're now trying to find ways to cope with it or avoid it. Okay, so there'll be avoidance. And within that avoidance, we start to condition ourselves, because if it happens all the time, we're going to act in a way to cope or avoid. And that is a conditioning, because everything that we do with frequency is a conditioning process. Make sense? So that's your conditioning. So those 2 points, coping mechanism and avoidance, is your conditioning. This is part 2, where if after you do all the steps here to realize to break down the trigger, when you want to change the trigger, you're going to start at this point, the deconditioning. Because once you understand the emotion, the perception, and interpretation, This is the point where we go back to start deconditioning that behavior and change to a different behavior that fits with the new perception. Okay? And I'm going to always go back to childhood, because traumas will always come from childhood, more likely. Even if we do have a massive trauma later in life, you know, that can be quite intense and not nice to even talk about. But how you cope with that comes from a lot of programming from so many different other little conditionings that you go through as growing up. So can you imagine how much baggage you're already bringing into a trauma that happens later on compared to a trauma that happens early on? Because when you think of a child's resources, there's only one resource for a child: unconditional love. The child is feeling that emotion from unconditional love. And anything below that causes a feeling of abandonment, causes a feeling of rejection, causes a feeling of unwanted, causes a feeling of unworthy. So those are the main emotions that we're going to use as we become an adult. But that's not the initial emotion that you actually found out right at the beginning, is it? But that's what they're going to become later on. And the reason they become later on is because every conditioning that we use will be linked to other traumas. It creates trauma bonds. And by the time it creates trauma bonds, we're at the top of the tree with all the branches. Yeah? So we worked from the root, which is the stimulus. Now we're going out to the branches. It's branching out into different trauma bonds. So you might find that a trigger can have 3 or 4 traumas related to it that happen at different times in your life. And you think, how? But then you find that you heal the latest one first, and then you work backwards to the core one. And you feel like, well, I've just healed this. Why am I going through again? Why am I still getting triggered? Yeah, the triggers get slightly different, but there's still a trigger of that same thing. It's just because it's trauma bonds. So then after the conditioning, we create trauma bonds, because the conditioning of that avoidance or coping mechanism that you used to make sure that you don't hurt yourself can be used in other situations that makes you feel that same first emotion that you had right at the beginning. Yeah? That's all it is. Makes sense? So trauma bonds are the branches up in a tree. And trauma bond can be very complex because, again, it's mixing ways of coping and conditioning to different situations that also hurt you. And then we don't realize, but when something within you, I don't know if it's the soul or the heart or the subconscious, I don't know what maybe the three altogether, realizes there's too many trauma bonds. It gets too much. So what we do, we protect our hearts. Yeah? We protect our hearts. We have to protect our hearts because it's the most precious thing that we have is the light of God in it. It's the light of source. It's the light of our soul. If we didn't protect our hearts, we would be walking soulless. So this is a survival of the soul stage, right? Where we start literally closing our hearts. We push away people and situations so it doesn't happen again. And we think we can keep that going until, boom, we fall back into it again, and then it's a big shock again. And we close our hearts. We stop feeling deep emotions of joy, of love. This is where the risk of depression kicks in. And something came to me today. I'm going to share it. I drank that much water while I was driving 2 hours, and I was desperate for a wee. And I used to have water infections a lot. And eventually, after a few years of antibiotics and all that, I realized that the water infection is related to anger, but bottle in anger, like suppressed anger, which I did have, which I realized I hadn't, but I didn't realize that was the physical emotion that was representing my suppressed anger. But I drank that much water today, and I went to the toilet, and I was weeing for about a minute. And I was just laughing to myself. I can't believe I'm weeing that much. I can't believe my bladder can actually hold that much, because I could never hold that much because my bladder was always inflamed. And I felt quite grateful, and I thought maybe it's going back to normal. But then I said something funny, and I was laughing to myself. I was doing a wee. I was going, see, that would have been my if I had because if I felt a bit tightness, and I thought, is there a water infection? No, it's just the stretch of the bladder that I haven't done that for a while. So it felt a bit funny. And I thought, if it is a water infection, it's probably just my suppressed anger coming through my body instead of through my emotions. And that's it, right? We suppress so much that eventually has to go through the physical body. And then we start to get ailments, I can never say that word, symptoms, diseases, conditions, repetitive sickness, yeah, like bronchitis, pneumonia, bladder infections. When they become so repetitive, right? That's conditioning, the body's conditioning. The body's giving you the message, but it's also conditioning itself to keep responding the same way. But the systems eventually can't cope, and it becomes something else chronic. So a bladder infection can turn into something chronic, could turn into bladder cancer, which I had a scare of perhaps being bladder cancer. I got to that point. And all it was suppressed anger. I never felt anger. I didn't think I was an angry person. But when I got triggered, oh my God, you don't want to be seeing me. It came out, and it also scared me, right? And when it scared me, I went back to suppressed it because I didn't like the way it looked. Yeah. Because that's how my mom and dad would speak to me, with that anger. So I suppressed it because I didn't want to be like them. Right? So even from a simple saying, can't believe you did that again, I have to clean up again, or whatever, those little things that we say without thinking for a child. So it can be so damaging, right? People say, oh, we don't have resilience anymore. That's why you're all like, getting sick and getting depressed. But we are dealing with a generation that suppressed it. And who's got the most, who gets the most triggered? Is it us, or is it the older generation? Who's the most suppressed generation? Is it us or the older generation? I think it's the older generation. Yeah? We are the ones sensitive enough to feel and want to release. So they call us all sensitive and all that, but really we are the ones actually allowing it to come out, right? So it's a beautiful thing. So when we protect our heart, and I want to go back on this, because when it gets too much, we will shut down. We will protect our hearts. And when we protect our hearts, we're doing a job. It's a sacred job, because you are protecting the soul of your body, the soul of your heart. And if you don't do that, you're cheating yourself. Protecting our heart comes from a soul call. When we shut down, it's your own soul call, right? We responded to that call. We should never feel guilty that we shutted our hearts. We should never feel shame or blame that we did that. Because it's your soul call to protect yourself. This is the time where we rebel against our parents a little bit, because we had enough of showing them that they shouldn't be talking to us like that, basically, or trying to mirror back to them the unconditional love that we carry. Yeah, our parents came with unconditional love, was born with it, and went through all the programming conditioning. We experienced their programming conditioning, but we came with a much higher concept of unconditional love, and the children today are coming with a much higher, profound concept of unconditional love, even more than the generations before, because everyone is evolving, humanity is evolving, so all of that is evolving so that we can start releasing. And if we didn't have that much sensitivity, we wouldn't be releasing, we would be suppressing, just like the generation before. Why do you think the older generation, I'm talking about the elderly, like 80s, 90s, they're so resilient? They've been through war. Look how much they have to suppress and protect their soul, protect their body, protect their emotions, to keep going, to survive. They really had to survive, right? And I work in the medical field, and what I notice is, the older people here, they don't, because they, it's 1945 type of adult age, 1945. They don't go looking for doctors. They get on with it. They won't ask for help. They get on with it. They couldn't have asked for help, because all the help they could ask, the husband, basically for a woman, was at war. The police services probably was all at war. They just had to get on, right? Through fear, through unknowingness of anything, what's going on. So they had to put it on and get on with it. So they're very resilient. There's nothing wrong with it. And those are the generation that doesn't want the help, doesn't want the children coming to assist and help. They're the ones refusing to be helped. There's nothing wrong with that. This is how they program themselves and condition, unfortunately, because of the circumstances of the era that they were living. But it doesn't mean they're not sensitive. They were, but they had to shut it down. And they did that. And I honor them for protecting that heart, protecting that soul, right? Because every trauma we go through, a little piece of our soul goes away out of our body. A fractal of our soul is detached and go out. And I remember when I used to walk around soulless, basically, because I prefer to be on earth with my soul slightly away from my physical body, because it was too painful for my soul to come back to my body. And I was very spaced out, didn't know what was going on. And I missed a lot of stuff in school, to the point where I had to repeat the years, because I just wasn't there. That is big trauma. That is PTSD. That is your shutting down. That is you honoring your soul and your heart. You saying, soul, step out while I live this life on earth. I'll do it. Right? You're protecting your soul. There's nothing wrong with that. This is the first thing you need to go back, because when you uncover triggers, if we are not honoring the shutting down of your heart as the most sacred thing that you can do for your soul, you will fall into self-guilt. You will fall into self-blame and self-shame. And the more you stay there in that little pool of those densities, the longer it takes for you to release that trigger and resignify. And a lot of people spend a lot of time there. If you can skip there by just affirming 100 times a day, you're not spiritually bypassing anything. You could be spiritually bypassing if you're not willing to keep going and trying to then change the behavior, change the outcome, how you react with things. But you're not spiritually bypassing if you're going all the way through and skipping the self-guilt, self-blame, self-shame. But if you stay there on just affirmations, but don't try to change it, then you are spiritually bypassing. You're just stuck. You're stuck on bottling down the self-guilt, self-shame, self-blame. Does that make sense? Can you see how that can work that way? Let's all have a nice deep breath. Nice deep breath. Have a drink, have a pause, have a connection with our hearts to calm down, to ease, to soften, to remind ourselves how powerful we were at that moment when we decided to protect our soul, to protect our heart, to protect that piece of the divine that lives within. We had to protect it. We had to protect it. We had no other choice. We try so hard to show everyone unconditional love. We did. And we didn't have enough resources to say to ourselves, in the end, after realizing that they're not getting it, that it's not our responsibility as such. But the unconditional love is so unconditional that we just keep trying. To the point that we shut our heart. But we did it out of honor to our soul and to our heart and to our divinity. And we are this divinity, we are divine, we are sovereign. And this is our journey now, the ascension journey, the self-healing journey, the wisdom journey, is uncovering all these blocks that we put around the heart, one piece at a time. And every little piece that we unblock, we bring a fractal of our soul back in. Because if the whole soul was to enter your body right now, it would be very painful. Honor your heart. Honor the fact that you protected yourself. It's the best thing you've done. It's the most divine, sacred, powerful thing you've done. And I want you to just breathe now. And I'm sending love to you. And I want you to open your heart and receive this love, to activate your own love within, which has always been there. It's always been lit and active. It's just been covered of a layer of protection. That's all it is. And we're just going to uncover little bits at a time Because if we uncover all of it, it could be too much for the soul. And it's okay to take one trigger at a time, one step at a time, one healing session at a time. Because you need time to decondition, deprogram, and re-signify all that you want back to the essence of when you were a little child. Back to the essence of your inner child, the unconditional love. That is your inner child. Your inner child is not the trauma. Your inner child is the unconditional love that you had intact before you had to protect it, which is still intact, believe it or not. Your unconditional love, your soul, your heart is still intact. You did the right job. You did the best job you could have done. You should be so proud of yourself. It's intact inside of you. All you're doing is just taking little pieces at a time with gentleness, with time, with love, with carefulness, with tenderness. You're going to nourish that little piece. You're going to bring your fractal back to that little piece. You're going to shine it. You're going to admire it. You're going to learn the lesson from it. You're going to become wiser from it. And then you're ready for the next trigger. That's what you're doing. Yes, it's a beautiful journey. Should be beautiful. Should be exciting. What's the next trigger? Oh, that's the one. Get it. I'm going to work with that now. And be confident that you can work, because you know you're going to know the steps at the end of this. You're going to be able to work yourself. Nice deep breath and just really relax into this whole idea, this whole new perception of healing. We just saw healing through different lenses now. And that's what we do with triggers. We just look back at the trigger, look at the origin and say, right, I didn't have the resource I have today. So how can I see that origin of that trigger, of that trauma, through different lenses of the resources I have today? And the more wisdom you acquire from these healing sessions that you're going to do yourself, your own self-healing sessions, you can call each trigger your own self-healing session. The wisdom that you acquire makes each next step easier. It makes realizing easier. It makes awareness easier. It makes finding that lenses easier. Okay? Nice deep breath in. Beautiful. Amazing. All feeling better? Good. So, remember I said that the conditioning and trauma bonds can, the main emotions that comes out of any origin of trauma is unworthiness, abandonment, rejection, and self-doubt. Those are the really four main ones, okay? But when we're a child, we don't really know those emotions by words, by label. And even those four, they will feel exactly the same, because these four emotions perhaps are the deepest one as a reflection opposite to unconditional love. Okay? So unconditional love is the purest of sacred love emotion, profound knowingness and understanding of what a soul should feel like. A baby's born that way. Okay? The moment that baby doesn't get the the needs met, the attention that they need to, because they're emanating so much unconditional love and there's nothing coming back. That gives a sense of lack, that gives a sense of rejection, that gives a sense of abandonment. And that is where a trigger, even though you recognize an emotion as the first emotion, but sometimes a trigger can make us feel, oh, I feel left out. Every time they do that, I feel left out. Every time my husband says this, I feel rejected. Or every time he does something, I feel rejected. Every time my boss does something, I feel something, right? Every time my sister does something, I feel something. And usually falls within those four, isn't it? So we walk around self-doubting ourselves all the time. And what did I say right at the beginning? Whatever comes first, trust it, that's it. Do not overthink. The overthinking comes from trauma bonds. Yeah? Because there's too many things bonded to it. So we have to think through all the bondings of that trauma. And that's why we're overthinking. Make sense? So the overthinking is part of the trauma bond conditioning. That's why we can skip it. Just go with the first thought. And the more you do that and you use that trust and belief, you're already eliminating the self-doubt part of the equation. Because you're skipping it, and it's not a spiritual bypass because you know you're going to go to the next step. But if you just stay there on the affirmations, just there, but doesn't take the next step to make the change, then you are spiritually bypassing. Okay? So it's a huge difference, okay? And it can be a fine line between sitting there spiritually bypassing and keep moving and not spiritually bypassing, even though you're doing the same action. Is what comes after that makes it look that way, okay? So that's what the self-belief, right? And the self-belief that you are unworthy becomes a limiting belief, isn't it? The self-belief that you've been abandoned, rejected, is a limiting belief because every time something happens, you're going to limit yourself down to feeling rejected instead of not. So you're limiting your ability to think beyond, to feel beyond. How do you feel beyond rejected? Accepted. So you're limiting yourself from feeling accepted. And that is where mirrors come in. Exactly. Mirrors come in. If you're feeling rejected and you have this mirror saying rejected in front of you, then someone walks in the room and for some reason with that person you have a trigger. If you're triggered by that person, but that person is always walking around with the mirror saying, I'm accepted everywhere. I don't care. And, my life is brilliant. I'm always being accepted. What's going to happen? You're going to mirror each other. Then you get triggered. That's what the trigger comes in with those mirror reflections. Yeah. And usually from these opposites. Doesn't have to be opposites, but it usually is. And I have another course on mirror reflections, which you can go much deeper, but we'll be all night. I actually do have a video I'll put on the group. I did a video about mirror reflection. It will help you understand that after we finish here, I think. So yeah, I'll definitely share in there. Okay, so basically triggers are mirror reflections, right? You are in a group setting, you are in a course, you're part of a group, you're in the office, you're in a family nucleus, you in a group of friends, whatever situation where you find yourself with another person, more than one, anything more than one, it's very difficult to get triggered by yourself because of yourself. but if you do, it's still a good place to be, because that means you're even more aware than most. Because at least you're aware of yourself. Because most of the time we're aware of others, aren't we? Most of the time you're always aware of others because of what, because how we feel, how others are going to perceive us. Yeah, again, that's a mirror of reflection. Okay, so let's go back to that little girl who was playing, oblivious that could have been anything frustrating to anyone. Yeah, it makes a mess. You know, the same with parents cleaning up and kids trying to help, and they go, no, I'll do it because I do it faster. You know, the kids feels like, well, I just wanted to help. Well, I can't help now. I can never help. I can never help. Right? So think of that little girl playing. The mom and dad, parent comes in, a bit frustrated. Nothing major. No harsh tones, no yelling, no shouting, no hitting, nothing like that. Just a frustrated tone that doesn't make a child cry, okay? Doesn't make a child cry. But it's enough built to create emotions that the child doesn't even know is there. Children work with energy, okay? They just know something changed. They just know something changed. They don't know any more than that, okay? They just know they left their unconditional love to something else, and that is a shock. That's all. So parents think, why are you doing that? That made a mess. Go play over there with your dolls. And then the mother cleans the Lego because it's more messy. And they play with the dolls. So then the girl stops playing Lego. And then you can hear parents saying, well, they never play with Legos anymore. I'm just going to sell them. Right? Not even realizing that the behaviors change because of that situation, repetitive situation, not just once, but repetitive. It can be just once, but repetitive situation. Then the child changed behavior, created a coping mechanism. She started to avoid playing with Legos. She also realized that if she didn't make a mess, she didn't get told off. So she was always, then as she got older, she started to be very tidy. She's got the tidiest room in the house. She doesn't want to give the burden to the mom or dad for them to have to clean for them. Then she starts to be perfectionist, right? If I'm perfect, no one can say anything. If I'm perfect, there's no burden to anyone, not even to myself. I won't hear a thing. I'm avoiding hearing something from anyone because that could cause me to feel, no, I'm not perfect. That, do you get it? This is trauma bond now. Think about it. Growing up with all those perspectives, that's freaking trauma bond building up into the tree branches. Yeah, this is where it starts, right? And I'm going to go back to that first emotion that I mentioned about children and energy. Okay, I'm going to go back to that in a minute. And then, of course, we are in working environment, we're working age, social skills, people skills. We go through many life tribulations and experiences and whatever. And all of a sudden, no matter what you do in the office, no matter how perfect, somebody has to say something. Somebody has to pick something. And then that person starts to get frustrated and questioning. The questioning is the best stage for a trigger. That is your point of, you've gone here, and now I see the way down as the healing, right? The unfolding of all the steps that we took up. Awareness, questioning, self-questioning. Sorry, I just did a movement I wasn't supposed to do. Questioning right here. Self-awareness. We're at the peak. We are aware everything can become unfolded, and that little piece from your heart can start to come off, right? A little puzzle. And then you can start bringing your soul back into it after you integrated a new way of thinking. So let's go back, because I want to decipher that emotion still, okay? We still need to decipher that emotion. That's not everything yet. We're not at the full peak yet. But think about this. Right. Babies only know energy. I had an experience. I was with my sister in her car, and she had a newborn baby, literally like she must have been 2 months old. I didn't have my own child yet. And we started talking about our dad, and she was getting very triggered, very triggered, very triggered. And she was just driving and talking. And her daughter started crying out of nowhere. She wasn't hot, she wasn't hungry, she wasn't wet, she was nothing. She literally picked up the energy, and it wasn't comfortable, and she started crying. Simple as that, right? So babies will cry when energy changes, when frequency changes, when vibrations changes, when it goes anywhere below unconditional love, because unconditional love is the highest vibration that anyone can vibe on, can be at, okay? And when the baby's brought down for any reason, which isn't the baby reason, yeah, is an external reason, that baby is going to show you through a cry, because a cry is the frequency below unconditional love. So the baby's already speaking to you and saying something's not right. Hunger is below unconditional love, so they will cry for hunger. Pain is below unconditional love, they will cry for pain. Being uncomfortable because they're wet, cold, soiled is below just the feeling, the physical body feeling of being uncomfortable is below unconditional love, they will cry. So it's just a change of frequency, right? And then they have this parent that is emotionally unavailable, that is hyper, that is frustrated, that is suppressed, volatile, that the energy, this is the baby, constant unconditional love, and this parent going everywhere, right? That baby doesn't know how to follow up. It is too much to follow up. That baby vibration will be everywhere. That baby will be crying all the time. Will be reacting to that volatile vibration. And then they give them a phone. How steady is the phone vibration? Very steady, very constant, right? So why, when things are chaos, they go to the phone? They're not addicted. They're addicted to the constant vibration of that phone. 4G, it's constant, it's 4G all the time. Now it's 5G, even better, but well, not really. I don't mean it in that way, but you know what I mean. It is a frequency, it is steady. Now the parent can go and do the volatile thing they want to do. They're not paying attention. They're here with the 5G steady, the steadiest vibration that they can hold below unconditional love, way below unconditional, but steady. So that's the iPads and the phones, right? Okay. So let's go back to that emotion. You don't know what that emotion is. Yeah. You wrote it down, but you don't know yet. Your baby. You just know it's not unconditional love. That's all. You just feel, actually. You just feel. And that created a perception interpretation. Now go back to your own perception interpretation that you wrote down. Can you see it with the different lenses now, after all you know now? After how much you honor protecting your heart? Can you see with different lenses? Just take your time and then just say yes or no with the thumbs up or not. Yeah. Different lenses altogether, isn't it? Same trigger, same trauma, same emotion. The story hasn't changed. But now you go like this and you go like that, and it's a whole different lenses, stories, right? You go like this, new glasses, right? So I want you now to another page. We're going down the pyramid now. This is the release of that trigger. So this is the top of your page again, number 1. Put the new perspective, the new lenses, the new perception of that stimulus, that core trauma. And then we're going to do another breathing, okay? So as soon as you wrote it down on a new page, because now we're going to heal that. This is the healing. This is the awareness. This is where you question. And this is where you clicked. The coin dropped. Okay? We're ready to heal. We're ready to release. We're not going to do it all now. We're just going to breathe and reconnect in this new vibration. We're reconnecting together, me and you three, in this new lenses, and accepting it, acknowledging. You're seeing the situation with evolved resources. That includes the language, the understanding of where people come from, where you come from, your role of protecting your soul and your heart, and the unconditional love that you came from, is that you are, but that you had it. You didn't have to protect when you're a baby. You only had to just be. And that's your awareness now. You're just aware of this new way of looking at it. This is wisdom. This is your new wisdom. Okay. And the more you do this, the easier it gets, the faster it gets, the quicker easier it gets. One more breath. And I send you love. And I want you to acknowledge the old lenses and the new lenses. The next stage that we're going to go to is acknowledging, really accepting exactly how it was and how it is. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. When we do that, we get stuck. We're here to acknowledge all of it, because you're becoming a different version of yourself, because you're evolved. So why are you going to look at that situation with old eyes, right? With old lenses only? If you evolved, if you became aware, you have a new lenses to look into, and you need to accept that. You need to acknowledge, to move on, to progress, to evolve even further. And this point of acknowledgement is very important. And the more you acknowledge and accept, the next time you get yourself in that same trigger, you're going to pick up the trigger just before it comes out. Okay? Because triggers are automatic response. It comes out, we just realize. Sometimes you don't even realize you're triggered, but when you become aware, you realize that you just got triggered and you just reacted. And it might take a few times to go through the same trigger for you to have that breath before, when you feel the triggers coming, you have that breath and you think, now I'm getting triggered. I don't have to get triggered. I have a new perspective of it now. And then you can jump into the new lenses straight away. You might not be able to jump into the new lenses the next time you get triggered. It might take a few trigger moments. And how it works is, so let's write it down. Automated trigger, right? Automated trigger. An automated trigger, basically what it is it's so engraved in yourself that you triggered, you don't even know you triggered. You do not even realize, you have not a clue. But then maybe someone highlighted to you why you get triggered. And then you start to look into, you start to see it. When you become aware that there is a trigger, you start questioning yourself. When you start questioning yourself, you become aware of the emotions. And I want you to feel everything, okay? It's all about feeling. You become aware of the story. You become aware of the reason. You become aware. Then you go through the steps that we went through. Then you become aware the trigger is actually coming right before you actually react, right before it becomes automatic. And that is the moment of change. I call it like a gap, like a safe space, like a sacred space where the soul is just giving you that moment to just think and feel the little build-up of trigger, but you don't have to jump on it because you have a new lenses to look at that trigger. Even though the trigger is still conditioned and is still coming the same way, you have a new lenses to look back into it. And you can work with your own triggers and your new perception now at the same time. You feel the emotion, you feel the trigger, but then you have a new lens to look into it, which then just changes the trigger, just takes away the urgency of that trigger to become automatic again, to come through. And you have that time to act differently. Yeah? So awareness, acknowledgement. You might take a few goes going through it to use the new lenses. And now using the new lenses, you have time. Because you broke down the automated system of the trigger. You have time to use it. You have that split second to use the awareness thought, the acknowledgement thought, and the new lenses. Okay. Yeah. This resistance is the next stage. And I'll talk through it in a minute. Yeah, I'm getting there. Okay. That resistance, right. So you have the new lenses to look at it, which then allows you to have either a different projection, a different reaction, or even an absence of anything of a reaction, okay? And they're all good. Whatever comes is good. Whatever comes is still an evolution of you learning to decondition the trigger. And together with the new lenses will come resistance, because you're going against a conditioning that is so engraved And that is the resistance, just going against something that you used to, going against something that is so automated that it's a comfortable zone. And it feels like you're going against yourself, but you're just going against a conditioning. And right now you are deconditioning. And I want you to decondition yourself and breathe through it. Breathe through it. Nice breathing. If you feel you need to breathe, feel breathing. If you feel you don't need to breathe, just send love to those that need breathing. Okay, just send love. We're all healing together here. We're all sharing codes of healing together here. Breathe. Nice breathing. Just breathe. It's okay. Nice. Just breathe. Anyone, if you can send love, we're all sharing. We're all healing together. You're surrounded by love. You're surrounded by love. You're surrounded by love. You're deconditioning your body, your physical body. You're deconditioning your subconscious. This is the most beautiful thing you're doing. Yes. And breathe, and we send love. We breathe and we send you love. You're safe. You're safe to feel. You're breaking that little puzzle around your heart with gentleness to yourself, with self-love. You're loving yourself right now because you're going through it. You're loving yourself because you're going through it. This is you deconditioning yourself through your own self-love. People think that we're going to find self-love at the end of the healing. This is an act of self-love. The same sacred action of protecting your heart is the same sacred action of deconditioning yourself. It's the most honorable thing you can give to yourself right now. And you should be brave to go through it, to feel it. Be brave, because the story's not going to come back. The fear, you're releasing the fear. The story's not coming back. It can't. That dinosaur that cannot come back. You just remember what the dinosaur looks like. So you can get through it. You are brave. You get your braveness and you get through it. Through that deconditioning. Resistance is the deconditioning. It's going against what's comfortable. It's going against what's easy, what's automatic. That's all it is, and you've done it. And this is the hardest part, the first one only. I'm telling you, it's just the first one. When you have to do it again and again, it becomes so much easier. And that's what I'm saying, you do it in 1 minute. This whole process that we took an hour and 29 minutes to get through still, you're doing 1 minute. On the day-to-day you're washing your dishes, you're doing it. Yeah? And that's the beauty of it. Beautiful. Keep breathing. Go in your heart and really just, you can tap your sternum just to get, actually, let's do a bit of tapping. That's it, just do a bit of tapping. Very good. So this is an emotional release, a physical release, yeah? Because you went through the resistance. Sometimes it takes us a few goes to allow ourselves to actually go through that stage. This is absolutely surrendering. Finding that braveness to go through it is that surrendering. People think, what does it feel to surrender? It's different to everyone. Okay? It's different to everyone. And this is an act of self-love. The same act of closing your heart for self-love. Yeah? The love of your soul. So next time you go through a situation that triggers you, either because you had this release, either the trigger is not going to be as intense, or it could still be there a little bit, but it gives you a chance to think on your next step, which is, how are you going to resignify this? How do you want to act different? How do you want to react to it? How do you react from suppressed anger to speaking softly? You might have a few stages to go from that to that. And you might have a few goes of those situations for you to try to wind yourself down to speaking softly from suppressed anger. But it doesn't matter. You will get there now because you have the process engraved in you. You are conditioning a whole deal process. I'm conditioning you. You are conditioning yourself. This is conditioning. Conditioning is what the subconscious like. Yeah? And then the integration, which is doing the different way, getting a different outcome. Doing the different way, getting a different outcome. Seeing people's reaction. How amazing it is when someone people don't try to trigger. Don't ever go there. But when you feel triggered by someone and all of a sudden you don't get triggered, have you ever noticed the reaction of the other person? It's a shock, isn't it? It's like, what happened there? Yeah. So everything changes. The people around you changes. The way you see the situation changes. Your reality change. This is what people talk about. Oh, you release this, change your reality. Like it's going to be everything. It might not be everything, but it might be just that aspect of that trauma. And you still have a few trauma bonds to change. And I'm not here to say it's difficult. It isn't. I'm not here to say it's lengthy. It isn't. I'm not here to say, oh, it's hard work. It isn't. When you do it a couple of times, it becomes fun, and it should be fun because you have the keys You have the tools, you have the knowledge, you have the wisdom. And you have a purpose, which is to unlock your heart that is fully intact. This is the best job you've done on earth, to keep your heart fully intact. Yeah? So your soul can come back in. If we allow ourselves to damage our hearts, the soul would have a hard time wanting to come back into the body, yeah? It might not happen exactly like that. I'm just talking figurative, really, but does that make sense? So then we have the integration, which might happen a few times, okay? It probably will happen a few times. But the healing isn't done. Even after we integrated, the healing isn't done because a couple of things can happen, right? I fell into the puddle and got stuck in the self-guilt, self-blame, self-shame a few times, for a long time sometimes, until I realized I didn't have to. And when that happened, even though I came out of the mud, went through the deconditioning, had to be brave then to find that braveness to go through the physical release, the emotion release, and the mental release. And then go through the deconditioning, the integration. I thought, oh, I'm healed. And then months down the later, the trigger comes back and boom, and I'm like, why? So I realized then there was trauma bonds. But I also realized that after I went through the trauma bonds, and because by the time I got to the trauma bonds, I was looking at this process with more easy, because I understood the process and I was going through it more quickly. Myself, with no help of anyone, just going through it. And as I was going through it, I was like, right, another trauma bond to that, another trauma bond to that, another trauma bond to that, fine. But then when I got to the last trauma bond, I found something I never did throughout all these healings, which was self-forgiveness. Yeah? And I thought, that's what it feels like, self-forgiveness. Why am I forgiving myself? And it dawned to me after doing lots of inner child. You know, like I said at the beginning, inner child is all about going back to that unconditional love child that you were born. But we use inner child to go back to the trauma that the inner child suffered at that age. And the self-forgiveness is to say, as simple as this, you know, I forgive that version of myself that didn't have the resources to see the situation with the lenses I can see today. I forgive that version of Robbie, that version of myself that couldn't understand how that situation, you know, where people were coming from. When the mom was frustrated, shouting at me. And then you have forgiveness for others, because you realize that your mom also was dealing with, or your dad, right? Your parent was also dealing with the trigger of themselves, not even knowing that that was a trigger. The way they're talking to us or behaving or communicating, it was a trigger. And it's not to blame that every trauma we have comes from our parents. It's not that. But our upbringing with our caretakers is the main source of conditioning and programming. But it's not inducive or on purpose. It's all organically absorbed, right? Because we talked about those generations, didn't we? The way they had to deal with things. So we then have forgiveness for them. And then we feel grateful for the healing. We feel gratitude. This is the best time to put the Ho'oponopono, oh no, I can never say it properly, but the Ho'oponopono prayer. I love you, I thank you, I'm grateful, I forgive you, because this is exactly where you get to the end of the story. You realize, because you're looking through a different lenses, but you integrated the different lens that you chose. This is where free will comes, because when the trauma happened back then, you didn't have free will. You just reacted, you just acted, you just went with it. Now you have free will to integrate how you want to be in that situation. That's your free will. That's your change of reality. That people talk as if it's a massive thing, like you're going to win £1 million and you're going to get a new house and a new car. It's not that. This simple change of reality makes a huge shift in timelines in your life. Because now you're not still in the timeline of the trigger, you're on a timeline of a more evolved way of being, right? You're in a timeline where you are more evolved to act in a different way, where there's no more triggers. The trigger's gone. And you're grateful. And then you realize this is another piece of the healing which you're not done yet. There's no need to forgive anyone, not even yourself. Why do you need to forgive them for acting the way they were? And why do you need to forgive yourself? None of you were at fault. And that's where I realized that little pool of mud of self-guilt, self-shame, self-blame needs to be skipped straight away. You should not spend any time there. And it's not a spiritual bypass if you're willing to continue with the process to get to here. But if you're stuck in that with affirmations, just cancelling out the self-guilt, self-blame, self-shame, and not moving, you are stuck, you are spiritually bypassing yourself. Does that make sense? So when you get to this point, you realize forgiveness is not needed. Forgiveness does not exist. Even it says on the Bible, Jesus has said that it's written in the Bible at some point. Forgiveness is not needed, because when you see things through unconditional love, I see that, how I'm talking as that little girl, right, with the example, that my parents was not aware, right? Therefore, this is acceptance of them. I unconditionally loved them for who they were then. They had no fault of their own. This is unconditional love. This is where you then fall into unconditional love, and you realize not just for them, but for you as well. Unconditional love for that version of yourself. Yeah, and then you realize there's no need for forgiveness, but you did forgive yourself. You did forgive them, but it's not. You haven't gone through the final stages of the healing. There's a whole healing process that needs to come to the end, and everything's changed, released. And the next time you're in that situation, the trigger isn't there. It just doesn't happen, doesn't even cross your mind. It doesn't even pass through your mind, because you even forget that you used to have triggers in that situation. You will. Yeah, it feels that easy, feels that like that. But then we do need to pick out something out of this. What is your learned lesson? Because we come to Earth for experiences, for learning lessons, so our soul can then bring the information back to the divine. So they know what it's like to live on Earth. Of course, it doesn't happen that way. I'm just, making a picture in your head, okay? So think about, what is the lesson? What is the learned lesson? It needs to have a learned lesson. That's the wisdom. That's your wisdom. That's your remembrance lesson, karma. That's your karma released. That learned lesson is the karma that you haven't learned in past lives. And you came back again to do it because you needed to learn. Okay. And even in this life, you went through the same lesson a few times and you didn't see it. Right? Sorry for laughing, but right, you release the karma because then it's a lesson that, if in a past life, you don't need to believe this, but if in a past life you had a series of experience that your soul chose for you to experience on earth, and you haven't gone through all of them for any reason, when you go back, the reason you want to come back is because you want to make sure you finish it. And that's why people use the expression in a spiritual, trend is, I'm doing it in this lifetime. That's it, done. Right? But if you only think of this lifetime, when we fall into repetitive cycles, people still call it karma, right? But when we fall into repetitive cycles, it's because we haven't learned the lesson. So what's the lesson for that little girl that is a perfectionist after all that? Yeah, that the reason that little girl became a perfectionist is because she allowed herself to feel burdened. So are you going to walk around feeling burdened anymore? You have a choice now, because you have a new lenses, new perspective, new awareness. That's the learned lesson, right? Are you going to walk around feeling burdened? So next time you're in the office and somebody gives you more work to do than you should, and in the past you would have taken them all and make sure it's done, but then go home frustrated that you're being pushed and overworked, but you still do it perfectly. Well, next week you're going to go back and say to your boss and say, I'm really sorry, but I'm feeling burdened, I'm feeling tired, and I'm feeling pushed, and I feel that I cannot do all of this. You're going to stand up for yourself. You're going to position yourself out of what? Self-love. You're not going to position yourself out of being rebellious because you say, I'm not doing this anymore, and that's saying quit. That's being rebellious, that's projection, that's not looking into the problem and trying to see through a different lens, because the lens is there to see how can you step up for yourself. Because when you're a child, if you could say to your mom or dad and say, okay, mom, I'll make sure I'll clean up after, or mom, you don't need to speak that way. That's a standing up for yourself, that positioning yourself. This is boundaries. Yeah? This is setting boundaries. Sometimes we try to set boundaries out of projection, out of reaction, out of being rebellious. And that is hard, very hard. It feels really difficult to set boundaries from those aspects. But when you come through all this process and you realize, and you see through different lenses, and you realize the reason why you are a perfectionist is because you're feeling burdened. The next time you feel burdened, you're going to take a break and avoid that burdens by positioning yourself. So it's the same process of a trigger, because you have coping mechanism, but we do a coping mechanism to suppress. Now you're doing a coping mechanism to allow you to be yourself. And your coping mechanism is positioning yourself, speaking for yourself, setting boundaries at your work, let's say, or with family, or let's say a husband and wife relationship where you get to do everything, but the husband doesn't. So are you going to set boundaries? Are you going, you're going to position yourself, but you position yourself out of love. And that's how, when you come from this unconditional love for yourself only, the mirror reflection works again. with the other person. Because when you position yourself from unconditional love, they see you through unconditional love, and their acceptance is easier. The acceptance of your boundary to them is easier to get through them than if you're setting a boundary out of being rebellious in a way, right? Because that's going to create resistance and friction again, and that person is going to say, right, well, if you're not doing that, then I'm not doing that, because you mirror reflecting a rebellious energy from that decision. But if you reflecting unconditional love from that decision to yourself, that's much more accepted on the other end. And this is how a family relationship or any relationship can be easily changed. The reality of that relationship can be changed. This is how it reverberates from you to other people. Not because you pushed the boundary into someone, not because you told them not to, not because you went out and said, I don't like when you do that. It's because you got to that point to understand where you're coming from, and you allow yourself to feel the unconditional love to then set that boundary. When you set that boundary in your heart, you set it out of hurt. But you did what you had to do to protect your divinity. Right now, you're positioning yourself to allow your divinity to shine. You're setting the boundary to allow your divinity to shine. Yeah? Now your soul can come back into that little piece that you broke down, little piece, and shine and be embodied into your body. That little piece of your soul can come, because there's no pain there, there's no hurt. There's only self-love and unconditional love. So the soul will come back. But if you don't get to that point, the fragment will keep trying to come back, and you're going to keep feeling a little bit of pain still. There's a little bit of something, it's not fully healed yet. You know when it's not fully healed yet. You know. Don't you? You know when you haven't got that yet. And sometimes it could be a medical condition that where you start from. Some people get triggered to get healed from a mental perspective, like a mental process, a thought process. Some people get triggered to get healed from an emotional process. Some people get triggered to heal from a physical, which is then medical conditions, right? Pain and medical conditions. Everyone will have a different way of starting. Yeah. And that's when it dawned to me that when I was setting boundaries from going through this healing, realizing, no, I have a choice. I can set a healthy, that's why I call it healthy boundary, right? Because it's not coming from being rebellious or a projection or a reaction. It's coming from a simple act of your own unconditional love for yourself. And the boundaries were easily accepted. And I thought, oh, that's nice. That was easy, you know. And then you don't fall back into feeling bad for setting a boundary. And that's one of the reasons we feel bad when we set boundaries, because we're doing it either too soon or because we're doing out of a projection reaction, or even self-guilt, self-blame, self-shame. A lot of the times when we're stuck in that little puddle of mud that I mentioned about the self-shame, self-guilt, and self-blame, we try to put boundaries there, but it hurts. It's painful. We still feel bad for the other people. We still, because we haven't completed the healing. So even the setting of boundaries has to have a good timing to it. In this timeline that we just went through with the healing process from a trigger, which pretty much is a healing process in a way. I never like to call anything a process, because I think healing is about energy. But we are on the physical body. We are here with the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind works through a process. The subconscious work on a process. We have to honor that, because the same way a trauma has its process to get conditioned and trauma bonded and all that. We use the same process to undo it, to unfold it, to release it. Is exactly, we are right now, when you use this process, you'd be conditioning yourself to use that process to release stuff. So you'd be always releasing stuff. you condition yourself to do that, right? So honor your subconscious. And the more you make peace with your subconscious, the more information your subconscious releasing much quicker, much easier. And you can go like this: why am I feeling this way? And your subconscious talk to you, and people think they might be talking to, I don't know, Command Ashta, the Pleiadian syndrome. They probably are. Do you know why? Because you are a fractal of that. You're bringing those fractals back every time you're healing. And that's what people call remembrance, right? You remember that you were from Andromeda. You remember that you're Pleiadian. You remember that you're from Sirius. Because every time you're healing, you bring in those fractals. So yeah, you're communicating with the versions of yourself. The same way we can communicate with our inner child version, we can communicate with those etheric versions of ourselves. But really what we're doing, we're going within the subconscious, talking to ourselves, and the subconscious talking back. And you can trust it. You should trust. People say, oh, don't trust the subconscious because it hides things from you. Yes, it does. But the more you work with it and trust, the more you find that balance between your mind and your heart. And when they come, that's yin and yang. When they work together, this is channeling. This is the communication. This is the balance that your soul needs to be here, to be in your body. And then you can walk around feeling fully guided, fully aligned, fully sovereign, fully divine, fully beautiful, fully happy, fully joy. And nothing triggers you. Like I said, the last 40 hours, I went through that a month ago, felt triggered, was able to see through the unconditional love and act from it. It was difficult, but I was able to see, but then act. This time, it was the same situation to the other two people. Luckily, I was there, and to me as well. I didn't feel triggered at all, but I was able to then support them through this process we talked today. And it was just a validation for me to be here today, because literally an hour ago, this is when I closed that chapter. When you send the link, I'm like, today? What? No, it's Thursday next week, and it wasn't. So even that, the divine has done its own design to work that way, and I'm here today. Okay, simple as that, nothing more. And you're here, and you're healing, and you're learning, and we are sharing healing codes. If I healed abandonment, and you healed injustice, and you healed burden, we are sharing. When we come out of here, the healing of burden that you healed might allow me to see that tomorrow that I still need, perhaps I have something about that to heal. We'll be sharing what we need. So be ready to go through a series of healing after this call, and be ready to use this that you wrote down, this process, because there is a reason why we're here, right? It's designed. We're here. And when you go through whatever happens that comes up for you to heal, you'll be able to see much quicker. And that's what's happening to humanity on a big scale, where waves and waves of people waking up from just having a conversation at the bus stop with someone. They're sharing codes they don't even know. And I call that 1, 2, 3, 4, because one person's healing elicits healing on another person, then another person. It keeps going around like the trees in the branch, and multiplying, and leaps and bounds of quantum leaps. We're going through quantum leaps at the moment. The energies that are coming through Earth is helping us with it. You probably seen all the channeling coming through, Arcturians, Pleiadians, Sirius. That's what they're talking about all the time. These energies are assisting with this, right? So don't think that a simple conversation at the bus stop is not going to bring you anything. And that simple conversation will be sharing of codes, because that's how souls used to communicate. And this brings us to numerology, synchronicities, and signs. So the synchronicity for me to be here today, with everything that happened in my personal, is that thing. It literally was the synchronicity was the signs to guide me here. My soul is guiding me here. My soul has guided me here today. Your soul has guided you here today for a reason. You're going to find out. You're going to figure it out. You're going to know. You don't need to keep digging and overthinking. Remember, the overthink is part of trauma bonds. Just allow it. And allowing is this. It's just trusting on your self-belief, on your mind, on your heart, on your soul, all together. Not just one sometimes, not just the other sometimes, all together. Self-questioning is beautiful, but the overthinking is noisy, which doesn't allow you to hear your heart. So the self-question is beautiful, but don't overthink after that. Just go quiet, and wait for your own answer. Okay. So we got to 2 hours. Don't want to go much further because it can go forever. But has your initial note changed? Again, after this next bit, if you look at your initial emotion from, that first part, and then the change of lenses, and then a little bit further down, integration. Was there anything through the integration that brought your attention to yourself, or the lesson learned that brought attention to yourself? Yeah, that's it. That's the process. You can do it again. Yeah, you can do it again. And the group is there for support, right? I'm there in the group. I'm happy to assist in any way I can. If you need private, let's go private. So let's go private. Let's get through it. It only takes a little bit. And one of the reasons I keep sending the heart chakra meditation, not just the meditation, but the connections that we do without video, is because I know healing is happening. If there's a group, healing is happening. And if I can assist, we're going to assist that way. And I'm not saying that you cannot assist. Yes, you can. Anyone can offer to send the heart chakra. If there's any day you're feeling amazing, just say to the group, I'm sending love. And put it in there. Send love. Start practicing that as well, because we need to learn, the give and receive, the reciprocity. And healing only comes with give and receive. When you go down to integration, self-healing, healthy boundaries, forgiveness, gratitude, those bits is very, very linked to reciprocity. These stages only happen when you're allowing this flow of back and forth energy, information between you and the situation that you're in. Yeah, because if you're only seeing one way, you're pushing it away. Yeah, you got to see both ways. You got to, and that's why I said you got self-forgiveness. You forgive them, but then you realize that the forgiveness wasn't even necessary. Yeah, when you get to that reciprocity, you realize it's like, no, forgiveness isn't necessary. It's unconditional love. I'm here in unconditional love. Someone can be very manipulative, very aligned with their purpose of being manipulative, and they're still coming from unconditional love. And it's the lenses that we need to go through a few times to be able to see that. Yeah. And that's one for another time. But it's a big one for another time. But you need to go through a few healings, and that would be lovely for you to come back on the group and say, Robbie, I know what you mean now. Okay? Because you will see it. You will see that. You will see that. All right? Pleased to see this transformation in all of you, right? Something has changed, something has clicked, and it'll be your own steps. And everyone holds one density at the highest. For example, self-judgment could be at the highest point, and then eventually going to come down and realize that the other ones are so much easier to let go because the highest one is gone. You're going to find that. So go through your notes, and it's not just the mental, it is the emotion, it is the energy, how he feels. Everything is in there. Go through it. Learn your processes. You're going to change how you do things. It doesn't have to be the way I do it. You're going to do it slightly different. It doesn't matter. Change it. You change. It will be a different process. Some processes you skip steps. It's fine. It's all malleable. It's all flexible. It's all organic. Don't push through the steps as well. Allow the steps to come to you because they're going to come natural. Maybe in the beginning you might have to push through a little bit, but then eventually it will become more organic and natural. This one step comes and then the other evolves, and then the other one comes and evolves. And just remember that you know if you have healed something completely, and if you haven't, don't get frustrated because there's probably a trauma bond. And if you sit and ask your soul to show you, you will be shown to then heal it. And you need to ask. You need to ask. You asking yourself. You asking your subconscious. EFT is there to open subconscious, right? It's beautiful. You go in there and it gives you, doesn't it? But the subconscious can be open in all different ways. But you need to ask. You need to speak to your subconscious. Another tool to use through this is speaking out loud. Yeah, if it keeps going in your head like this, when you speak out loud, things come out that you didn't even think about before, that you've been grinding in your head for hours. But when you speak up, new things come up and you say, well, I didn't think of that before. So you need to speak up, get an audio and record yourself to yourself, nobody else. I used to record audio as if I was talking to a friend trying to open up. That's how I used to do it. Today I just thought, just keep doing it. You don't have to show to anyone. It's just for yourself. Or perhaps you like writing. Sometimes writing things come out as well that wasn't in your mind going around in circles, right? The subconscious like expressive writing and speaking, but you have to hear yourself. That's a tool as well, right? So thank you so much for coming today and just jumping in because you wouldn't feel like you probably didn't feel like jumping in because you knew it was today. I didn't know it was today. I thought it was next week. But anyway, and I was ready. I knew it had to happen. After what happened today, I knew it had to happen. I realized why it had to happen. And today, if you add 19/1/2024, it comes to 1. And 1 is the beginning of everything. It's a new chapter. And I knew I was getting to a new chapter. So this video is a new chapter for me. And thank you so much for being part. Thank you very much for trusting. Thank you very much for being here. And this is what, you can never write down your healing. You know the steps, but you might do different steps because it will be shown to you. You need to allow that to happen and be comfortable with what's coming. The unknown. That's what comfortable with the unknown. I just went through the whole experience and I look back and I couldn't draw that. I couldn't design that. I couldn't write that down. So all that is going to come through just because of that trigger process. Okay, so I will be doing the numerology soon and the synchronicities. I want to do one on healing process in general, and I want to do one on abandonment, which it'll be the last one. So, feel free to join next few courses and go for workshops and go from there.